Probably the thing I get the most complaints about on these videos, discounting the people who think I'm faking my accent for some reason, is maps, or the lack thereof. I'm just not much of a maps person, you know? But today's video is all about one particular map. You see, there's a long corridor in Embankment Station. It's really rather lovely. It's decorated in the style typical of underground electric railways of London. It contains a number of maps of the Bakerloo and Northern lines, including this old one here. But the most notorious is about halfway down. It's a map of the Bakerloo Line that features a station that doesn't exist. Willesden Green. Now, before you take to the comments section, I should point out that there is a station called Willesden Green, but it's on the Jubilee Line, not the Bakerloo Line. The station that should be on the map is Willesden Junction. Willesden Junction and Willesden Green are two very different stations. They're more than a mile and a half apart, as I discovered while filming this video. The route between the two is a long walk through the back streets, including a lot of suburban housing, a park, and, for some reason, the Cambodian embassy. Willesden Junction is a curious station. It was opened in 1866 by the London and North Western Railway, the company that owned the West Coast Main Line up to Carlisle. 3 years later, the North London Railway also built a station here. The London and North Western Railway were backers of the North London Railway and eventually would formally take them over. The Great Western Railway and the Midland Railway also had connections nearby. The result was a tangle of tracks and a confusing mess of platforms, from which trains might take a number of different routes into the city. In fact, the station gained the nickname Bewildering Junction as a result. In 1912, yet more confusion was brought about with the addition of another line, the so-called Watford DC line. This was a line from Euston to Watford that was electrified using direct current, or DC. The reason for this was to make it compatible with the Bakerloo Railway, which started using the station from 1915. In 1962, the original London and North Western platforms were closed. These days, the North London Line and the Watford DC line are both part of the Overground, and the Watford DC line is still shared with the Bakerloo Railway. Or Bakerloo Line, as it is now known. So there you go. Willesden Junction is the station on the Bakerloo Line, Willesden Green is not. Except it's not quite that simple. Mind you, is it ever? Because there was a time, quite a long time in fact, when Willesden Green actually was on the Bakerloo Line. Willesden Green was originally built by the Metropolitan Railway. There are some subtle clues to this, like the C.W. Clarke architecture, and the fact that it has Metropolitan Railway written on it. The Metropolitan Railway, of course, became the Metropolitan Line, and Metropolitan trains still pass through the station, albeit without stopping. The Chiltern Main Line also passes through, which was originally opened by the Great Central Railway. The station opened in 1879. As the Metropolitan Railway expanded out into the suburbs of northwest London and beyond, they ran into a problem with congestion. They ran frequent commuter trains that stopped at every station, but they also ran express trains. From 1899, they also had to deal with the Great Central Railway's trains. What they really wanted was to be able to separate the fast and slow trains. In 1933, nearly all of the underground lines in London were taken over by the London Passenger Transport Board, along with the buses and trams. The board was better able to coordinate the different lines. They decided that the best way to resolve the Metropolitan Line's congestion problem was simply to eliminate the slow trains altogether. The Bakerloo Line had spare capacity, so it was decided to dig a tunnel from the Bakerloo Line platforms at Baker Street to Finchley Road. The Bakerloo would take the Metropolitan over from Finchley Road up to Stanmore. Willesden Green was one of the stations taken over. But in the years following the Second World War, the Bakerloo ran into problems of its own with overcrowding. Plans developed to build a new line from west to east that could take some of the pressure off, and the Bakerloo branch to Stanmore would be attached to the end of this. The first section of this line opened in 1979. You would know it as the Jubilee Line. In other words, from 1939 to 1979 there was a period when Willesden Green actually was on the Bakerloo Line. And so was Willesden Junction. I don't know if that caused any confusion, but I'd be amazed if no one went to one station mistaking it for the other. And that brings us back to the map. Is it a relic of the pre-1979 era? A tribute to times past? No, it's just a mistake. To be honest, I think it's a fairly harmless one. There are plenty of other maps, and I doubt you'd get halfway down the corridor without a reasonable idea of where you were going. These days, it's just another of those oddities of the underground. Well, I hope you enjoyed this mislabeled tale from the tube. If you did, I would be grateful if you'd leave a like and perhaps consider subscribing for more tube curiosities. Thanks as always to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the misprinted map to my lengthy corridor. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.